Welcome back to another brand new episode of Teens No Cap. I'm your host, Charity Chafee. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in various New England states, and I'm here today to do a little bit of a solo pod for the new year. For those of you who are joining in for the first time, I am a teen specialist, which means my entire practice is teens and young adults. They're my people, they're my population. And so my entire practice and my entire theory and every kind of skill and etc. that I have honed has been all entirely focused on teens and their families. And I want to talk about a few things tonight because I know that obviously Happy New Year. I'm recording this on January 1st, which is very exciting, everyone. We made it to 2026. There are times in 2025 I wasn't sure we were going to make it, but we made it into 2026, which Chinese New Year happens to be the year of the horse, which I'm very excited about. If you haven't read anything about the year of the snake ending and the year of the horse starting, I definitely recommend it. It's good reading. It's good motivation for the new year. But I wanted to do a solo podcast because I feel like there are some things happening in patterns for teens that I think are really important for this time of year. So a lot of us just got through 2 weeks of really great vacation, of no responsibilities, no homework, very few kind of responsibilities and, things you have to do, right? And we're going into the last weekend that people have before they return to school, before they return to the grind, and before we get into what is arguably the longest period of time between any real break, and the content at school is getting a lot more challenging. So I know in the teen world, we talk a lot about how September, October is the time where you see a lot of increase in referrals. People are needing services. There's a little bit more with crisis, but that's one flow. But the next flow into services is often mid to end of January and into February. Part of that is because January, February, March for a lot of states, it's winter, it's miserable, you can't get outside, the activities are more restricted. So we have a lot less we can do, especially if you were in a New England state or a state that it snowed. And so you get a lot of people that are very kind of cramped in their houses. They don't get out as much. Friend time is often limited too, because if you're going to go somewhere, you often have to pay to do that. If you're on limited funds, you may just not be going out because Christmas takes from a lot of us extra money that we would have had to spend on other things. So one thing to note is that oftentimes you'll see a higher influx. You'll see kids and teens start to struggle a little bit more when January happens. The weather, the season is definitely part of it. The other thing is a school schedule where we're often going to see kids feel very dragged down, disheartened, disengaged, frustrated. They're being challenged a lot more during one of the most challenging times of the year. And on top of it, this is often the time where there are very, very few breaks. So depending on the school district, the school system you go to, you may have a day off, a day or two off in January. You may have a week off in February if you get that winter break. But a lot of kids are in school from January 5th straight until sometime in March, with very few breaks, very few long vacations, very few days in between. So we see a lot of kids that start to kind of get run down, they're frustrated, etc. And the transition back to school is really hard. They just spent 2 weeks literally chilling, doing nothing, no expectations, no responsibility, nothing they had to get done for the most part. And they got to sleep in every day. They got to realign with friends. They got to kind of do whatever they wanted to do. And now going back into it, we're literally telling them, hey, you have to resume this schedule that is a grind, right? Especially if we're going to take into consideration that a lot of the schools, with the exception of California, a lot of the schools in Massachusetts and other places, the teenagers start school at 7:30 in the morning, right? Which we know, we have the research, is not aligned with their circadian rhythm. It's not aligned with where they would actually start school if they could go to bed and wake up at a time that actually fell in line with their biological clock. So we have a lot of things stacked against us, but I don't think that means that January, February, March have to be miserable. The other thing I think that kind of leads into this is the idea of resolutions and the idea of ending a year and understanding what kind of resolutions are, what they mean, and how we have demonstrated them for teens, whether we're their teachers, their counselors, their therapists, social workers, DCF workers, parents, etc. And I think that there is this sense of new year, new me with a lot of teens, and they're going to go in and they're going to be like, everything is new, everything is different, everything has changed. And the hard part is that they want that to be true, but that's not actively true because we know that that's not how change happens. So when we're talking about new year, new me, and we're talking about New Year's resolutions, it's really important to allow ourselves time to think and process through what went well last year. What did they really enjoy? What did not go so well that they don't want to do that again? What is something that has been holding them back? We don't want to force the idea of New Year's resolutions. And in fact, there are a lot of people that don't even like that term in general. They talk about kind of new commitments, new sense of self. There's different ways to word that. And so if you're someone as a parent or as a provider who's trying to figure out what your own resolutions might be, or if you want to kind of buy into that, I think there is also that helpful thought and content around, is this actually what we want to push for teens, for my teen? Is this going to work for them, etc. I think January is always a really great time to kind of pause and reflect, not even for the whole year, because that could be a lot, but just to really pause and reflect between August and December. What have they done that they want to do more of? What do they want to get involved in this quarter? How do they feel like they're doing? What supports do they need going forward? This is a great time for parents, providers, anyone who's working with teens to do that check-in. When I am working with someone in January, I often will take that first, second, third session in January and just chat about their goals. How do they think they're doing? Are they on target with the things they wanted out of this school year? And it, I think, takes the pressure off because it's not necessarily a 12-month commitment. It's more looking at it in terms of January 1st to May, June, right? So we're looking at kind of 3 to 6 months. What's coming up for them? What's going to be big? This is also the time where you can take a step back and do a little bit of planning around is there an event coming up that is going to be really hard for them? Are they working towards a goal? And how do we get on the same page with that goal and make sure they have the supports they need? Because we can't forget, same thing with adults, if we're creating goals for ourselves and we're not giving ourselves the right scaffolding, it doesn't matter what those goals are, we're never going to reach it, right? So being really realistic, we need to also make sure we're creating opportunities to create scaffolding to help support our teens. Because remember, they don't want us driving the bus anymore, right? They want us there, maybe in the passenger seat, maybe in the back seat, maybe in the trunk if they really just want you to let them be. But you're still there. And so you can create really helpful scaffolding and help remind them of what their goals are as you go through this process of understanding how they are assessing their year. And I'll say too, I think it's really important when you're sitting and talking with someone, a teenager in particular, about their year, letting them go first. We often as adults are used to kind of putting our opinions out there and making it known how we feel. But when we're helping someone assess kind of their school year and kind of doing that midway check-in, we want to let them go first because we want them to have the autonomy in that conversation to really say what they're thinking and feeling. We also don't want to put it out there so that they feel like we are impacting their perspective or leading them into a direction, right? And you might get a kid who's this year effing sucks. I hate this. I don't want to go back to school. I don't want to, right? And the thing is there is a difference between I'm venting and I'm frustrated and there's a reason this is happening versus I'm actively choosing not to go back, not to do this, not to work on myself, right? And I think as a parent, as a provider, that is one of the things that I spend time figuring out with a teen, especially if I'm getting that resistance or the frustration or the I don't want to. And the thing is we have to allow teens to vent about how they're feeling. That doesn't always mean that is going to be what they do. So often I get kids the last weekend before, they're super frustrated. They're I don't want to go back. I'm dreading it. It's going to be awful. And I think about that and I'm just how many times have adults said that about our work, right? How many times have we said that about re-engaging in different family obligations or friendship obligations or I don't want to go back to freaking CrossFit, right? When you think about adults and what we say and how we vent about situations, it's actually not really any different from the way that teens sometimes express themselves, right? So if you have a kid who's I don't want to go back, I don't want to do this, it's going to be awful, this year sucks, that is okay, right? We're not there to correct that. We're not there to be like, you're wrong, right? What you could say after they've reflected on that is you could be like, what I've seen is this, right? I've seen you have times with friends that are fun. I've seen you have times with your sport that was really good. I've seen you have times, etc., etc., etc. You want to make sure that you're not sitting there and saying something like, you don't actually feel that way. Like, that's not real. Because what that is it's invalidating, right? You're basically telling them that how they're feeling and how they just express that to you isn't real. It doesn't matter. Not a big deal, right? That they couldn't possibly rewrite about their own experiences with school, with academics, with friends, with whatever. So we want to be really careful having these conversations because we want them to lead, and we want to be able to be reflective and share, our experience, but in a way that's kind of like, this is what I saw versus I think you're wrong because this is how you feel. We don't want to do that. And the truth is you're going to get a little bit of resistance with kids going back. It's going to be a rough transition going back into there. We have kids that are in a really hard part of the year, not just because of the weather, but again, because the academics are getting a little bit more challenging. For those kids who are finishing up their junior year or, finishing up their senior year, there's a lot of just like icky, like, I want to be done, senioritis, right? We are going to be in for it. But again, doesn't mean that it has to be all bad. And I think talking about New Year's resolutions and talking about doing that check-in for that like year of how are you doing and what's, what can I do as a parent, as a therapist, as a, social worker at school to be helpful and supportive for you, right? We want to make sure that that is a little bit of a checkpoint and that nothing has changed, or if something has changed, we can address it. The other thing is that I think that because we know that this is the time where energy is a little bit lower, seasonal affective disorder is in full swing, really make sure that we're prioritizing healthy foods and, exercise and nutrition and sleep, and making sure that like all of those things are met. When we are sleeping well, when we are eating well, when we are moving our bodies, we are that much more responsive and resilient when it comes down to difficult emotions. The other thing I'll put out, and I know that these are very controversial for some reason, is the idea, if you haven't yet talked about, like mental health days with your teen, I would talk about mental health days at this point. This is the time in the year where, again, kids are going to start struggling, and we want to try to like be preventative and responsive to some of that struggle versus allowing them to fall on their face and then us getting frustrated when they're not doing the things that either we feel like they need to do or that they said that they wanted to do. So, mental health days. Mental health days to me are not a day where it's like, I'm just not going to do anything and I'm not going to school and it doesn't matter. Mental health days to me are something that is a little bit more planful. It's a little bit more about like understanding really how you use your sick days. And that could be something when we're talking work full time in the future, that we have to understand if we are only allotted, let's say 20 sick days for the year, we have to understand how to use those as adults and how to kind of like structure them in a way where we still have some time if we really need it towards the end of the year. So most people have 5 to 6 months left of school with like 2 1-week breaks left in there. So when I'm thinking about mental health days and the struggle and whatever, I'm like physically looking at the calendar for my client and I'm like, okay, we have this chunk, this chunk, this chunk, this chunk, right? I'm pulling data for how many absences they've had. I'm pulling data for, what parent expectations are. I'm pulling data for games and anything they might be out for. And I'm really helping them understand the bigger picture of how all these things fit together. Some people really like that structure because they find that it helps them understand really how to focus and how to kind of choose their mental health days or sick days, all of that stuff. But I think mental health days really align with this like long-term idea of understanding how to structure our time off and the time that we get in case we are sick and not feeling well. The other thing that it does is it really allows us to have the conversation about how like mental health is just as important as physical health. And so there are some times where you are going to want to take a mental health day because you can't do it. And I think that in the process of understanding mental health days, I like to go through a system and just really help them understand, as far as the parents go, as far as the client goes, what would be a mental health day, right? What are the expectations for a mental health day? What would they want that to look like? What are the parents okay with? What is the process going to be like of like having that conversation or that collaboration for mental health day? And we create that process together. And every family is different. Every teen is different. And so there are some families that are okay allowing their teen to just like pick whatever day it is and they don't really care and it's like whatever because they know what they have in school and they kind of have that trust. And then there's other parents that want to have a more kind of robust conversation about like, what does this look like and what do you want to do and what's the purpose of mental health day? And there's nothing wrong with any of that. What's right about it is that it's helping the kid further understand kind of the parent navigation of mental health days. And it allows me to add support into about like, you know, maybe my own personal experience of how I use mental health days and like what that whole thing looks like together. So mental health days to me are like such a helpful thing. And sometimes like kids really just need a break. They need a day to play hooky. They need a day where they don't have to go in and face the pressure of like whatever is happening. They need a day where they can just sleep for 10 hours and just like not have any pressure. They need a day where they can go shopping with their parents and, you know, go get like ice cream for lunch if that is a school day and it's mental health day, like do it. You know, I think that we often put this pressure too on mental health days. Like, well, if you're taking mental health day, it has to be something that helps your mental health. But when we think about the spectrum of coping skills and we think about all of the things that adults use on a daily basis to make themselves feel better, it could be anything, right? Like I think about the Mean Girl quote in terms of like, it doesn't exist. The limit does not exist for how many things we can do and try and understand and, you know, add in for habits that is going to be super helpful for our mental health. So I think mental health days are an overlooked thing, and I think there can be a lot of preventative with that. The second part of this is really talking with school. So if your kid has an IEP, a 504, any sort of educational support, it's really kind of looking at like what we need to accomplish over the next couple months, what has worked really well, what hasn't worked really well, you know, where they're at for attendance. Like I would want you to kind of pull all of that information. The more information we have, the better decisions we can be supportive of for this teen who might be struggling. The other thing is that if we're talking about kind of seasonal affective disorder, we're talking about, you know, different things that are happening because of the lack of outside time, the lack of like the sun, things like that. It's adding in things that are going to kind of be helpful support. So like a lot of girls right now, a lot of teens, they love to tan. They love to have that like feeling. So using different types of like tanning products. Some people I work with actually like literally go to the tanning beds. They put on, you know, their full range sunscreen and just go lay in the bed for 20 minutes because it feels really good and really warm. You know, utilizing like hot tubs and things like that really help bring the warmth into a really kind of like dreary, cold season. So I don't think that there really is anything that is like off limits in terms of like trying to get through the next like couple months. But I think it's really helpful to also think outside the box. You know your kid the best as a therapist, like you know different things about the kids you're working with. Those are great opportunities to have discussions about like what they think they might need, what might be helpful, what might be fun, what can we help them kind of look forward to get through these next like couple months that are fairly brutal. So if we're talking about coping skills and we're talking about talking to school and making sure like we understand what the plan is for the next couple months and we know that there is like usually more of a struggle between January and June for a lot of teens. This also kind of leads into like a preventative crisis planning space where we're talking about, you know, what does this teen look like when they're really struggling? What are the signs and symptoms? What are the behaviors? What are we noticing, right? What are we picking up on? Who is really responsible for checking in and making sure that like they have a space to kind of talk about those things? I think that I'm definitely a fan of crisis planning, even if a kid has never been in crisis, because I feel like it's not a matter of like if, it's really a matter of when. And I think we need to be really logical about that when we're talking about teenagers because of the brain development, because of the situations, because of like, you know, the social pieces, the academic pressure, you know, all the self-imposed pressure as well. And so I think when we're doing this check-in, talking about how things have been going, talking about school, now is also the time to like reinvest in that crisis planning and making sure that like you have a plan that feels safe and efficient and the kid feels supported by and that everybody's on the same page about the crisis planning components. Because I think about my, when I worked at agency, and it was always really interesting because our first session was always obviously intake paperwork and sign consents and stuff. And then our second and third session was always doing the comp assessment and like really going through like treatment planning stuff. And then we would always end up doing a crisis plan. And it was amazing to me how many parents or teens were like, well, I don't need that. I've never been in a crisis. It's fine. But they don't think about like the first breakup or the time when they got a D on a test that they needed to get a B on. And they don't think about how they may respond at this new level of pressure. And so even if the crisis plan is not something that they have utilized before, it definitely is something that I think can be so beneficial to use, or to build so that they understand what the response could be like and what they have access to if they're starting to struggle. So example A, I will give you, this is a hypothetical, but was working with a client and had never been in crisis, and they were kind of resistant to building a crisis plan. And I understand that because this person had never been through crisis and was like, why would I need that? I'm not in therapy for crisis. But, inevitably they were like, okay, fine. What does that look like? So we talked about different signs and symptoms of like when they're really struggling and what that would look like, and different behaviors and what would concern them versus what would concern, let's say, their parents. And then we got to the point of talking about like different skills and strategies. And then at the end of the day, we talked about the different levels of care in Massachusetts and, how the school would support them, what that would look like. And they were like, okay, cool. And we put it together, didn't really touch it. What often ends up happening is that they hit a patch and they're like really struggling. And they're like, they come back to session and they're like, hey, I need that thing. I need that crisis plan. I need this part of the crisis plan. And whether it's a partial program or some sort of like hospitalization or, a crisis thing, like they've had time to think about it. They understand what the steps are. They know what the process is. And they're asking for that level of care. So crisis planning, I think, is like absolutely a necessary skill. And I think if you haven't done it with your clients or you need some support on it, like follow, subscribe, email me, let me know. I want to help support you. I also on Tuesday have a group coming up that is literally a teen focused case consultation. So that's all we do is like talk teen and talk cases and talk different things and be helpful to each other, which has been really lovely. A lot of things I said today, lots of things talking about crisis. I really think it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think the more preventative and prepared we can be, the better we're going to be. And I think it also is really showing teens that like we understand that there might be highs and lows and that we're here and we're willing participants and supports for them when that happens. So I think traditionally, January to March is a really just tricky time. And I think it is kind of like a slog, especially with March being like 5 weeks long. It's the worst. So as a parent, as a provider, I try to find kind of like the fun things that people can do. And I definitely take time to suggest going out and meeting with friends and making sure that like kids are being social and like following up with parents. And like you may have teens that just need a higher kind of like touch and support right now because it is just that time of the season where things suck and that is okay. So I'm very excited for January this year because I am very excited for all the fun things that are coming as part of the school community and as part of Teens Uncharted. And so I'm very much looking forward to it. And I also know that this is not the best time for every person in the world and that January is typically a very rough time. So I have lots of fun things coming. So I would love your support. Like, follow, subscribe. Let me know what you want me to talk about, clinical or not, even just with working with teens. But I'm very excited to put together some really amazing things for you guys this year to help you in your work with teens. So we got this. We can do it. We will make it through. I know it doesn't feel like it's going to be fun, but we can actually have fun and parent teenagers and work with teens at the same time. So that is my inherent belief. But I'm signing off. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2026. I cannot wait to go on this journey with you.